Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm starting the recording, so you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. So I hope you can see my screen and hear me fine. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about what kind of tools we use to work in the open and what are the different open source philosophies we have and how how can we do engineering in the open while uh, encouraging uh, community involvement, community discussions, and so on. And so there's no slides or anything. This is just like a to-do list for me to follow to make sure I cover everything. Feel free to interrupt me to ask questions. There's whatever questions you might have. A lot of this might seem like a repetition if you've been around for some time, because I may have already discussed some of this with you. All right, so I'll just start jumping in. I'll just dig into it. So first thing is we have two platforms for chatting and talking with each other. One is Slack and one is Zulip. Why do we have two? Well, Zulip is something, it's considered it's used very often in open source projects. It's used by Rust, by many other big open source projects. It's sort of like GitHub in many ways, where if you're open source, you should have a Zulip stream for discussing the project and so on. And our Zulip is open to the world. Anybody can join it. Our open streams are open in a way that Google can crawl it, and Google and search engines can crawl it, and they can, if you search for specific things about Near, you would even get hits from our Zulip stream and so on. So that is all intentional. We want all of our engineering discussions to be in the open. So whenever you want to discuss something engineering related, it should be happening on Zulip. And whenever the discussion is about something that does not impact the security of mainnet, of like an existing network, mainnet testnet, like if you're not discussing a security issue that is on the network right now, it should be on the public channel, right? So only if you're talking about something that, oh, there's a bug on mainnet right now, and I want to discuss it, then it should be on private. But if you want to discuss engineering things about anything about the protocol and so on, it should be in public channels. So the rule of thumb that I use for Zulip is if it's something about our private lives. So if I'm discussing with my team, oh, who's available next week, or who's taking time off next week and so on, we don't want that in the public, right? So if we're discussing taking time off, vacation, blah, 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 those kind of things are in private. And if we're discussing security issues, then those are in private. Otherwise, everything is in public. We, even if sometimes we're sharing documents that are not available publicly, that is fine. Just share them on public, right? There's no harm, in doing that. It's just a link, and people might not be able to open it. People might, but that is fine. It is noisy. It is chaotic. The average person outside of our team or outside of protocol will struggle to follow our conversations if they just start in the middle of it. But that is okay. We are not, it is about building the muscle memory to have everything be in the open and work in the open for the eventual future. So maybe I should have started off with this, right? Currently, we are the main engineers working on the protocol, and in many ways, we see ourselves as the owners of the protocol of Near Core. But the future that we imagine is that we are just one of the many, many contributors to near core. The future that we imagine is, the best analogy for that is, imagine you work on, you're part of the Rust team at Microsoft, right? Microsoft is a big company. They have a ton of different projects, and you're working on a team whose job is to make improvements to the Rust programming language. And somehow, through some weird indirection that helps Microsoft make money, that helps Microsoft's business. But your focus is to just improve Rust. That is what you're working on. And somehow that helps the company, and that's why you're employed by the company and so on. And you're just one of the many, many contributors contributing to Rust. And currently, we are the biggest contributors to near core, but the goal we're trying to reach is, we are in this place where we are just one of the many contributors. And so that is how we should think about it whenever we're thinking about working on near core. How can I help enable that future? How can we get to that future? When we are working in that future, when, say, the feature that I'm working on, the project that I'm working on, not everybody working on this project happens to be at Pagoda, happens to have access to the same Google Docs, Jira, whatever tools that someone at Pagoda does. Can they still contribute to this project? Can they still follow the progress on this project or not? And those are the ways to think about it. That's what we should do. So this is why we think about Zulip. Everything should be, as much as possible, should be in open. We also have Slack. We use Slack for company chats. This is where we get updates about the company, HR, people ops, updates from the rest of the teams at Pagoda who are not like Protocol, who are working on their own specific projects. They are not working in the open. They do not need to be open source. So they do their own thing on Slack, and we have overlap with them. So sometimes we are on Slack for them, but all the open source protocol work happens on Zulip. Here are some Slack channels that everybody should be part of. If you're not part of them, please let me know, and I can always help you join. General you should have been added to that by joining Slack. Protocol is a closed channel. This is one that we have on Slack. This is where we sometimes discuss things like, oh, when is the next offsite going to take place? Or like, when is the next happy hour going to take place? And those kind of talks. We sometimes do end up discussing engineering stuff in there. I would ideally have those things take place in Zulip, but from time to time that happens. That's okay. I hope everybody knows about the Donut Meetup channel. Please join if you haven't. This is a way for us to, because we're completely remote and we do not always see each other very often, or we could go an entire day without talking to people and so on. This is a good way for us to get to know each other better. So if you know about Human Time or any other similar tool, what Donut does is, if you join this channel, then you would be randomly connected with someone from Protocol every week, and one of you will be encouraged to set up a meeting for half an hour to have a chat, and you can talk to them about what they're working on, about anything private, whatever, and get to know them better and so on. There are quite a few Zulip streams to list that you should be part of. These are some of the public ones that you should be part of. All of these, I guess, here. Pagoda Private should, so if you're not on all of these streams, as part of Protocol, you should be on all of these streams. And if you're not, please let me know, or please join. And if you have trouble joining any of them, let me know and I will add you to them. Each team within protocol has their own private channels. You should also be part of those channels. Like if you're in the node team or in the core team, you should be part of those private channels. And depending on what projects you're working on, sometimes you'll get added to private channels for other teams as well. Yeah, so these are the things that you should be part of. I'm sure most people, maybe other than Soon, I think have been around for a while. So I think everybody should be part of the NEO organization on GitHub. Make sure you have access to this repository. This is where all of our code lives. This is all open source, and so on. I don't think I need to give a lot of introduction to this one. We also have a private fork of this repository called NearCore Private. This is only for security sensitive issues. So the same thing I was talking about earlier, NearCore is where we do all of our work in open. Anybody can see all the issues there. Anybody can see all the PRs there. But if and when we do find security issues on the mainnet or testnet where we need to work on them, we need to track those issues and so on, we use the NearCore private repository. If you do not have access to this repository, let me know. I will add you to it. But I believe everybody should have access to it if you're part of the NEO organization. The open issues here are all known security issues that we know of that are currently impacting mainnet or testnet, and we may or may not be working on them. You can do pull requests here to fix these security issues, but do not merge this pull request on this repo, because that doesn't make sense, right? Because if you merge the pull request here and then we try to sync the fork again from the public repo, that will break. Once you're ready to fix a security issue, you have your PR that is ready, then you would typically work with the node team to figure out how to release that and how to create that copy of that pull request on the public NearCore repo, get it merged there, and so on, so that you can eventually close the issue here. So the pull request you would just create here just to be able to discuss the fix with your peers. Oh, I want to fix this issue. Here's my proposed fix. People can give you feedback on it and so on and so forth. So that is why we create pull requests here. And the issues are here so that we have a single place to track all of our known security problems, and we can discuss them there and so on and so forth. Any questions on what I've shown so far? I think I saw some chat messages. I don't know if there were any questions on. Alex, I'm not sure what you mean by plan for protocol discussion. Are you there, Alex?
Where do you see that?
Yeah, it's in related to the presentation, sorry. I asked this before it started. It's about protocol discussions in an hour.
Okay.
Okay. So do you have a question about that, or should I continue?
No, please continue. I don't have more questions.
Okay. Yeah. We have a suggestion on how you should set up your username or your profile name and so on Slack, Zulip, and GitHub. A lot of people, for anonymity reasons or for whatever reasons, have nicknames on GitHub, and they have not put their actual names on their GitHub profiles. So it might become difficult for me to know if I get a pull request from someone on. So for example, a good example here is Marcin's GitHub profile is just called mmnear, and he hasn't put his name on it. So when you first see mmnear, you do not know who that person is. So for that reason, we always propose that when you set up, say, your Zulip profile or so on, you put your GitHub name in brackets there, so that, and you can do that on Zulip and on Slack similarly. So that way, if I ever see a message from someone on GitHub, I can go and correlate that with Slack or Zulip to figure out who I'm actually talking to. And sometimes that's good to know who you're actually conversing with and so on. So this is a suggestion that we have for how to help us find people and so on, because for various reasons, people do not want to put their full name on GitHub. So I think that, yes, I think, Nikolai, that is a good point. I think we should, I typically do not, I also typically do not refer to people with the actual names on GitHub. So if I need to refer to them, if I need to actually ping them, then I would do @mmnear. And if I do not need to ping them or just refer to them, I would just say mmnear. So yeah, like, I think if people do not want their real names exposed, then we should respect their privacy and try not to do that. The next point I want to discuss are NEPs. Like, does anybody know what NEPs are? I think some people might be familiar with them now, but I just want to get a rough idea of what people know about NEPs here. I see Razvan shaking his head. That's good. So some people don't know. So NEPs, the simplest way to explain NEPs, or the analogy to NEPs, are RFCs in any other project, right? So if you have an open source project that you want to propose a change to, you would typically create a proposal. They're often called RFCs. RFC stands for request for comment. And you would create that, and you would say, I would like to propose adding a new type of compiler optimization to Rust, or a new feature to standard library, or this or that. And you would create a proposal. You would explain the proposal. You would say why it's a good idea to do this, why, what are the benefits, what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the impact that existing users will have, why it's worth the additional complexity, and so on. And so NEP stands for Near Enhancement Process. And that the idea here is the same. So we have a GitHub repo called NEPs. And it contains a bunch of stuff, not just NEPs, but the main focus for us for now is NEPs. So if you haven't had a chance to read this NEP here, I can strongly recommend taking some time to read it. It is not that long. It explains how the process works. And essentially, anytime you are going to make a change to Near protocol that is going to change the API, that is going to change the way people interact with it, then you will have to go via this NEP process in order to have your change be approved and be merged into Near core. So as an example, Alex and Anton and a few others are working on flat storage right now. While they're working on flat storage, they are proposing to change how we charge for reading the gas fees that we charge for reading from storage. And this is going to impact every single contract on Near core that is running on the Near protocol. That's why they need to go via NEP process. So if we look at the pull request, there is one for flat storage here that they've been working on, and this is making progress and so on, and this is going to go on for a while. And so what we see here these are some of the recent NEPs that have been merged. And if you were at the protocol all hands meeting last week, I also talked about what are the open NEPs that are currently most interesting for us, that are actually being worked on, that are relevant for us. The most recent one that has been merged is called meta transactions, that we talked about in various meetings and so on. But as an example of a project that doesn't need an NEP is cold storage. So Vats and Paulina and a few others are working on cold storage. That is a project where we change how the archival nodes store the state, so that they can store lots of state more cheaply and in a more performant way. This does not change any API to any of the smart contracts. It doesn't have any visible impact to actual users of the protocol. So that's why their project does not need to go via an NEP. If you were to make some changes to the internal of, say, if you were to make a change where you replace RocksDB with another database, that would also not need to go via NEP, because that is not changing the API at all. You're probably making that change to make things more efficient or so on. So that is totally fine. In future, once we become more decentralized, once we have more contributors, maybe we will start requiring NEPs for additional stuff, even if you're not making API level changes. But for now, we require them for API level changes and not for anything else. I already talked about this earlier, right? So we always want to work in the open source, and it is very important to maintain this ethos. It is easy to fall back to, for efficiency purposes and so on, to say, hey, I need to make quick progress. I'm going to do some of the work more in private. And examples of that are, we often have meetings to make progress on projects, right? So we have regular meetings to discuss flat storage. And when we have a meeting to discuss flat storage and we discuss design and we take decisions there, if we do not actually reflect those decisions somewhere open, then someone outside of that meeting will struggle to follow the progress on that project. Now, many times that is okay, if you're trying to make quick progress on a project or something, or the project has only been worked on by a couple of people, that is fine. It does take a lot of work to keep people updated, to keep updating Zulip and so on. But the benefit of that is that the next time, say, a new person in protocol, in Pagoda, actually wants to join that project. So again, taking flat storage as an example, we have people who have come in, like Min, who joined in the middle of the project, near the middle of or late last year. She worked on the project for a few months, and then she left to work on something else. And having had good documentation and good description of what the current status of the project is, what are we working on, what are we doing, and so on, that helped her onboard onto the project much more quickly. So it is more work to do things in the open, but it has a lot of benefits too. Other people can follow your progress. It gives you a lot of visibility to see. Other people can see what kind of progress you're making. They can understand the purpose of your project. They can understand where it is, what the ETA is for when it might be done, and what to expect. And if they're asked to contribute, or if they choose to contribute, then they know how they can get involved and so on. Razvan.
How do we keep track of the milestones or time estimates of every project? Do we do them in a doc? Update them in a doc, or do we have a tool for it?
That's a very good question. So So I think there is no clear alignment between all the different teams within protocol right now on how we do it. Currently, I believe the core team and the runtime team are using something called tracking issues on GitHub. And the node team uses Jira quite heavily. And so actually, you know what? Let me just get your question is related to the next point here. So let me just get into that. So we currently have 2 issue tracking tools. We have 2 tools for tracking issues. We have GitHub and we have Jira. In the beginning, we used to have just Jira. And then there was a bit of a push to move things to, in the beginning, we had just GitHub. And then there was a bit of a push to move things to Jira. And the reasoning for that was that we wanted to have high-level project management like OKRs and so on Jira. And then we wanted to have stories or issues that we create on Jira be connected with the OKRs so that we can say, oh, when I finish this particular story or this issue on Jira, then that will automatically show that I'm making progress on this OKR and so on. And my team level OKR is attached to the division OKR, which is attached to the company OKR. So we would have this nice project management happening if everything was on Jira. That works well for teams and for projects that are not open source, but that doesn't work well for the protocol. That doesn't work well for Near Core because we are open. We want to work in the open source. So when we are creating or doing stuff on Jira, then people outside of Pagoda do not have access to it. They cannot use it. They cannot work with it, and so on. So there was a lot of disruption last year where we kept moving back and forth from Jira to GitHub to Jira to GitHub. Currently, as far as I understand, most of the protocol Near Core relevant issues are created on GitHub. And we use a tool called Xelate to sync them back to Jira. So Xelate is an automated tool that will, whenever you make an update on some issue on GitHub, it will make the same update on the relevant issue on Jira. And Soon asked, why do we not open source Jira issue? It is complicated. It's not possible to just. We've tried to look into it, and there were various reasons why we cannot do it. I think the best person to answer this question would be Arthur, who maintains Jira and Confluence and all of our Atlassian toolchain. He will be able to answer that precisely. But and the other reason also is there's also this. What is the standard way that open source projects work? And a lot of them like to stay on GitHub. So we want to be have a similar working style as other open source projects, so that people, when we hire new people who have been working in open source world, it's easier onboarding for them, or someone external who wants to contribute or work with us, they have an easier time onboarding because we're using tools that they're familiar with and that they're used to, and so on. So now to answer the question that Razwan asked specifically, let me find if I can. So we have this thing called tracking issues. Let me see if I can find a little documentation on it. So this idea of tracking issues, we actually copied it from Rust, and some other projects use it as well. And so here's a little post on how Rust uses it. So here's an example of a tracking issue in Rust. So this is a feature or project that they're working on Rust. And the idea for this tracking issue is that, let's say you're working on a single project. Again, I'll use flat storage as an example. So whenever you start working on a single project, you should have a single tracking issue for that project. And this tracking issue centralizes all the known information about this project. This tracking issue should contain links to all the GitHub discussion, all the Zulip discussions that are happening, should contain links to all the Google Docs or Design Docs, wherever they might live. They should all be here. It should contain a list of what are all the open issues that you need to do, contain a list of all the issues that you're finished working on, and so on. And the idea is that you would create this description once, but you would keep evolving it over time, right? You do not create this description once and you add comments below it, because then it becomes hard to follow. So when you first start working on, say, flat storage, you say, okay, I want to work, you create a tracking issue and it's very bare bones, right? You do not know how to split it down into smaller issues. You do not know what different issues you need to work on and so on. So you just say, okay, I want to work on flat storage. Here's the initial design document. Here's a link to it. Here's the initial link to the Zulip discussion that is happening on this project and so on. And that's it. That's all you have. Then you work on the design. Then you figure out, okay, I need to create another column in RocksDB. I need to track the deltas. I need to do this, that. So now you have some idea for what are the different breakdowns for the different issues you create. So you would go and edit the description. You would add those things, and you would create maybe sub GitHub issues saying, okay, add delta tracking for flat storage, add a new column in RocksDB, do this, do that. And once they're being done, those will get getting updated and so on. So that the idea here is that whenever someone new wants to work on the project, so what you can point them to this tracking issue, they can look at it and figure out, okay, what all are the interesting design documents that I need to read in order to understand this project? How much of this project is done so far? How much needs to be done? Like, what are the next issues that need to be done, and so on and so forth. Does that help answer your question, Razvan?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is all aspirational, ideal case, right? I will admit that we're not using tracking issues as well as we could, and it is partially on the more senior engineers and on the EMs, on the managers, to encourage all of us to get better at these practices. And the better we get at it, the easier time we will have onboarding new engineers into protocol, onboarding other engineers to work on your project, and so on. So it is a very good habit to get into, and so on. The next thing I want to talk about is a development philosophy. So as part of being because we're part of the Near organization on GitHub, we have the ability to create branches on Near Core when we want to do PRs. This is not how the average person outside of Pagoda who wants to contribute to Near Core would work. They would have to create a private fork of Near Core in order to be able to create PRs against Near Core. And this is why we encourage everyone, it's the idea of like eat your own dog food, right? So if you are not putting yourself in the same shoes as how the average external contributor would have to go through, you will not notice what challenges they face, what are the potential issues they can hit, and we would not optimize for that. We would not discover them, and we might not fix those problems. So we strongly recommend people to have their own private forks of Near Core. that they should that they use for development. And so what you do is you create your own private fork, you create a branch on your private fork, and then you create a PR from your private fork saying, I want to merge this branch into Near Core, and that would create a PR and create a PR like that, and so on. Alex is asking about Bill Kite and Nate Duck issues. That is a very good point. Yes, we have had issues like that in the past, and that is precisely why we ask people to do this, so that we can discover these issues and we can fix them. Right? If people were not doing this, then we would not have found these issues. So this is why people should absolutely do this. And yeah, so, and I think if you look at our documentation, we also describe it in the contributing file here. So yeah, so so fork the Near Core repo, create a new branch there. Yes, and here's some guidelines here. These are another good set of guidelines that everybody should follow. Not enough people do that. And as a reviewer, I should ask people to do this, but yeah. This is another good way for people to prefix their PRs. And this is a very standard practice in many projects. And this will help reviewers understand very quickly what is the impact of this change, what are you trying to accomplish. And this also helps with searching for relevant PRs and so on. And when you're looking at Git logs, right, if you want to do a bisector, if you want to go back and look at like what was the impact, what was this commit all about, like these are all hints that help you understand what was this commit about, so that you can put yourself in the right mindset and so on. Code ownership and PR reviews. So we have tried a few different ways of having, so whenever you create a PR, right, some code owner needs to approve it. And the way we've tried different ways of doing that, and one way you might be familiar with experiences is that different teams would own different subsets of the repository. And when you create a PR, so you might have the case that Node team owns these 5 directories here, core team owns these directories, runtime these directories. And if your PR just touches these directories, then someone from Node team needs to approve it. If your PR touches these directories, then both the teams need to approve it, and so on and so forth. That is a very standard practices in many projects. We used to have a practice like that too. What we figured is that that did not scale very well for us. We are still relatively small as a team. And many times people were creating PRs that required approvals from 2, 3, even more people. And that was slowing down our velocity, our development velocity a lot. And as such, we decided to take a different approach where the code owners own the entire repository. So if you're a code owner for Near Core and you approve a PR against Near Core, then it is ready to be merged. It can be merged now. So you own the entire repository. So with great power comes great responsibility, right? So if you're a code owner, you do have a lot of power. You should use that carefully. So please be careful when you are approving PRs. It is on you. It is your responsibility as a code owner to decide, I do not feel comfortable approving this PR. I do not feel comfortable. You can always review a PR. The reviews are always welcome. But if you are a code owner, and you need to then be careful when you approve a PR. If you approve it and you trust the author, right? If the author is your colleague or someone you know, then you can say, look, I'm approving it, but I do not feel comfortable enough for it to be merged yet. Please get a second follow-up review from another person, and you should specify who that person should be, and so on. And yeah, so but if you do not trust the author, right? If the author is someone you've never worked with, if they're an external person, then you do not know whether they would actually wait for the second approval or not. In that case, don't approve, review, and say, I think this should only be merged once, I don't know, Watts or Razwan has also additionally approved it, and only then it will be ready to go. So that's how it works. I can show you guys what the code owner looks like. So if you were to go to team and near core code owners, so these 12 members are currently our code owners that we have. And once you've been part of protocol for a long time and you have built up a good understanding of significant code of the protocol, you can ask to be added as a code owner. The other thing we do here is we have a differentiation between something called a super code owner and a code owner. And it's not, you cannot tell them apart by looking here. In order to tell that apart, you need to go, and I don't think everybody has this access, so I don't think everybody can look at it. But essentially, whenever you create a PR, one of the super code owners will be assigned to review it in a round-robin manner. And they can, at that point, either review it themselves, or they can decide, I do not feel comfortable enough reviewing it, or I do not have enough time to review it, and they can delegate it to someone else. And that someone else will usually also be a code owner, and then they would review it, they would get the notification, they would review it, and once they review it, then it will be approved and it will be merged and so on. So that is how things usually work. So here you can see the names that are not selected. These are the super owners, and the names that are selected, they are not super owners. But I don't think this view is visible to everyone, and you need to be in the group and so on in order to see it. Issue triaging is also a big item here. We're not very good at issue triaging. I'll say it right now. We do not have a process for it. People are doing it randomly when they find some time to do it. But whenever a new issue is created or a new PR is created sometimes as well, we should develop a process for that so that contributors to Near Code, they're having a good experience. So if I am an external person and I find a bug and I create an issue out of it, currently we do not have a good process for making sure that they get a timely response, that we thank them and that we look at it and so on. This is something we absolutely need to work on and improve, and hopefully things will get better over time. This is our forum that we use occasionally for discussing things with the community. So if you were to look at the NEP process, then whenever you have a new idea or you want to work on a project that requires an NEP, as part of that, you are also required to make a post on this forum and to explain the idea here, to gather some initial feedback and discussions. In practice, there are not a lot of people who are interested in core protocol discussion hanging out here. So many times you do not get a lot of feedback from this forum. but hopefully it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right? Because we're not as active on the forum, not as many people hanging out on the forum who are interested in this kind of discussions. So the only way to solve that is to have more of these discussions, and then hopefully over time, more and more people will join. So if you're ever seeking user feedback, if you want to engage with the people who would be interested in the changes that you're proposing, this is a very good forum for you to try out. Another thing that is worth mentioning is the protocol community group. This is something that has been started recently. So protocol community group is, we have quite a few different community groups that we use to encourage participation in the Near ecosystem. And the protocol community group is one for people who are interested in the development of protocol, making improvements to the protocol and so on. So this is another very good place for you to keep an eye on what is happening in the space, what other proposals are being made. If you want to make a proposal yourself, you should look at it. If you want to get some user feedback, user input, this is a good place to go to get it. I help organize it right now. Ori and I work on it to organize it. We have regular meetings once a month. We meet and we have a call where different people come and talk about different things. And we advertise the meetings on this Zulip stream. There's also a Telegram group. There's also Twitter and so on. The different ways to keep in, stay involved and get up-to-date information when the meetings are happening and so on. Finally, the documentation. So just like our issues and our PRs are open, we should try to make as much of our protocol documentation open as possible, right? In the past, we had a lot of back and forth on what is the best platform to have our documentation, and there are pros and cons for using Confluence versus GitHub versus something else. And eventually, it was decided that no, we are going to keep our documentation on GitHub. It is open. People can submit PRs to change it, to improve it, and so on. So any protocol relevant documentation should be on GitHub. We still have a lot of documentation on core, on protocol that should be moved to GitHub that hasn't moved to GitHub yet. For example, when I open our Confluence page, I see a lot of discussions here. Some of this is duplicate. Some of it has moved to GitHub, but the Confluence page has not been deleted yet. But in some cases, we just haven't moved it to Confluence yet. To GitHub yet. And so this is something, another thing you can work on improving and helping out and helping improve our open source ethos. These are all the different things I wanted to talk about. Does anybody have any questions, comments, feedback? All right. I'm happy to see that everything was crystal clear or everything was super confusing. One of the two. So if nobody has any questions, then we can end here. Thank you very much, everyone. And see you folks in the next meeting.
Thanks, Aki. That was awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.